Black woman accepted a job that nobody wanted at the millionaire's farm and lived the best days of her life. She was broken, desperate, and overlooked. But one dusty farm, one lonely millionaire, and one unexpected job offer would change everything. This is not just a story of work. It's a journey of healing, hidden pain, buried secrets, and a love that bloomed in the most unexpected soil. From rejection to restoration, from silence to success. Wait until you see how she turned a job no one wanted into a life everyone envies. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to know who's on this beautiful ride with us. Now grab your tea, sit back, because this story will melt your heart and raise your soul. Maya sat stiffly on the examination table, cold paper crinkling beneath her as the dim light flickered overhead, the ultrasound machine humming softly like a warning she didn't yet understand. The technician's hand froze, and her eyes darted toward the screen as her breath hitched ever so slightly. "It's triplets," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the heartbeat monitor, which now sounded like drums of war. Maya blinked, thinking she must have misheard, but the screen confirmed it. 3 tiny figures floating in her womb, 3 separate heartbeats pulsing like promises or warnings. Her fingers trembled on her lap, her breath stuck between disbelief and fear. But before she could even ask a question, the door burst open. A shrill, icy voice sliced through the hallway like a dagger. "Abandon that girl!" It was Jonathan's mother, Margaret Whitmore, the epitome of Boston aristocracy, clad in pearls and poison. Maya flinched, as though struck, and the technician instinctively shielded her. The moment felt surreal, time stretched, frozen in shame, fury and dread. Her world didn't just crack, it collapsed inwards. She heard the technician murmur something soft, maybe comforting, but it was drowned beneath the echo of Margaret's hatred. Maya clutched her stomach unconsciously, feeling the weight of new life and old rejection. Everything in her life had once been so carefully arranged. A scholarship to Harvard, honors in biomedical science, dreams scribbled in journals with sparkly pens and sleepless ambition. Now it all felt like glass, shattered by a few words and a heartbeat. Her mind spiraled back to how it all began. Jonathan Whitmore had walked into her life like a storm in designer shoes. They met at a faculty fundraiser, heir to the Whitmore fortune, charming and effortlessly arrogant, but somehow he'd noticed her. She was tutoring for extra cash, hiding behind in thrifted cardigans and oversized headphones, while he roamed the campus like a prince who didn't need permission. He made her laugh when no one else noticed her silence, brought her coffee with handwritten notes, kissed her fingers in the library when no one was looking. He made promises, absurd, beautiful, reckless ones. "You and me against the world," he once whispered under the autumn leaves, his breath warming her cheek, his hands sliding into hers like they were crafted for each other. Maya had believed him. She had believed in love, but love hadn't prepared her for this sterile room, this monitor, this betrayal echoing down polished hospital floors. Her phone buzzed beside her, but she ignored it. Her eyes were locked on the image, the 3 little lights inside her, unaware of the war erupting beyond her skin. She remembered the first time she missed her period, how she sat on the bathroom floor of her dorm with a stick in her hand and nausea in her throat. 2 pink lines stared back at her like fate's signature. At first she'd laughed, a broken, tearful laugh. Then the dread settled in. When she told Jonathan, he didn't panic. He smiled, pulled her close, whispered, "We'll figure it out." But that was weeks ago, and everything had changed. She hadn't expected Margaret to find out, and definitely not like this. The ultrasound tech gently printed the scan, handed it to her like an apology. Maya stared at it. 3 futures, 3 souls, and one decision: fight or fall. She left the clinic in silence, the photo clutched like armor. Outside, Boston was cruel and cold. She walked past the ivy-covered buildings of Harvard that once made her feel invincible, but now seemed to mock her. She passed girls in yoga pants laughing on their phones, professors huddled in debate, none of them knowing that a war was being waged beneath her ribs. That night, she sat in the camp, bus coffee shop, hands trembling over her phone. She typed, erased, then typed again. "Jonathan, we need to talk." She stared at the message for what felt like hours before pressing send. Her reflection in the laptop screen showed someone she barely recognized. Eyes swollen, skin pale, lips pressed tightly to hold back the flood. She wasn't just pregnant, she was erased. From Jonathan's life, from his family, from the future she thought she'd built. Her scholarship suddenly felt fragile. Her reputation, already under scrutiny for dating someone like Jonathan, would be shredded. She imagined the Whitmores spinning narratives over champagne. She trapped him. She wanted the money. She's not our kind. Maya knew what came next. Whispers, cold shoulders, lost opportunities. But she also knew something else. She wasn't going to disappear. Not for them. Not for anyone. She touched her belly, heart pounding in defiance, in fear, in something ancient and maternal. These babies didn't ask to come into a war, but now they were her army. She would raise them on strength and fire, not privilege, not pity. She sat back and looked out the window where snow had begun to fall. Every flake was a new beginning. She pulled her scarf tighter and whispered to herself, "They don't know who they're up against." In that moment, something inside her shifted. Not just the nausea or the fluttering movements she imagined, but a core transformation. She was no longer a student chasing grades. She was a mother in the making, a warrior, a builder of futures. And even though everything around her was crumbling, something deeper was being forged. As she rose from her seat and walked back to her dorm, she held the ultrasound image like a torch in the darkness. The cold wind stung her face, but it couldn't break her. She was already becoming something stronger than pain. She was becoming purpose. Snow clung to the ends of Maya's braids as she climbed the dorm stairs, her breath clouding in the air. Fingers clenched around the ultrasound image folded neatly in her coat pocket like a secret tea. Hat the world wasn't ready for. The corridor smelled of burnt coffee and old textbooks, muffled laughter echoing from rooms where life still made sense, where midterms and parties ruled and futures weren't complicated by betrayal or babies. She passed a mirror and caught a glimpse of herself, pale, swollen-eyed, but standing. She didn't sleep that night. She sat cross-legged on her bed under a dim reading lamp, laptop open, search tabs filled with prenatal vitamins, housing for single mothers, and tech grants for women. At dawn, a message blinked onto her screen. "Meet me, the Harbor Club, noon. Jonathan." She didn't eat, didn't cry. She just walked through the bitter Boston wind like a woman walking into war. The Harbor Club was gold-trimmed glass and hush-toned elegance, a world that had never belonged to her, even when his hand had once held hers. Jonathan was already seated by the window, polished and detached in a navy blazer, sipping espresso like nothing had happened. His jaw barely moved when he said, "You're late." Maya sat without answering, her stomach tight, her hands resting protectively on her lap, instinctively guarding the lives he was trying to erase. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't even say her name. Just pulled a crisp envelope from his coat and laid it on the table like a bill he intended to settle. "This should be enough," he said, sliding it forward with practiced coldness. "Use it to fix this." She didn't move. "Fix what?" she asked, though she already knew. "The mistake," he replied without blinking. "Let's not pretend this was meant to last." Her throat tightened, but she refused to look away. "It wasn't a mistake when you told me you loved me." He scoffed. "You were a distraction, a good one, but this is real life, Maya. You don't fit in it." Then came the sentence that would echo in her memory like a scar etched in sound. "You were, a project, a charity case that went too far." The words landed like glass splintering inside her chest. Not even rage, just silence, a crushing, breathless silence. Maya stared at the check without touching it. $10,000. Blood money in Helvetica font. Enough to push her into silence, to buy her out of his legacy, to make her disappear. She thought of her babies, tiny heartbeats humming beneath her skin, and wondered if he ever felt 1 ounce of their presence. She wanted to scream, to throw the coffee in his face, to demand why he made her believe in a future that never existed. But instead, she smiled, a small, bitter, terrifying smile. "You think this solves something," she said quietly. "It doesn't. It just exposes who you've always been." A nod from him, indifferent. "Take the money, Maya. Disappear. That's what girls like you do." The security guards were already walking over, as if she were a trespasser in his curated life, as if she didn't carry 3 pieces of him inside her. One of the guards reached for her arm, but she stood on her own, steady as stone. She picked up the envelope slowly, deliberately, not as surrender, but as strategy. The check meant nothing to her heart, but it meant fuel to her future. She looked Jonathan in the eyes one last time. "I hope someday you understand what you just threw away." He didn't respond, just looked back down at his espresso, as though she had already vanished. The door closed behind her with a click that felt like a full stop. Outside, the sun had risen a little higher. The snow glittered on the sidewalk like irony. Maya walked to the riverfront, wind biting her face, and sat on a bench with the envelope still clutched in her fist. She wanted to cry but couldn't, not because she wasn't hurting, but because pain had turned into something else now. Fuel, fire, clarity. She opened the envelope, pulled out the check, and stared at the numbers. It was insult disguised as generosity. She nearly ripped it in two, but paused. No, she thought, not yet. This wasn't hush money. It was investment capital. Not for Ilence, but for survival. She folded it, slid it deep into her purse, and muttered under her breath, "You'll regret this." On the way back, she passed the campus chapel. For the first time in years, she went inside, sat on the last pew, and closed her eyes. "God," she whispered, "I don't know if you see me, but if you do, help me prove I'm more than what they tried to make me." That night, she packed her bags. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she knew she couldn't stay. She wrote a single email to a name she hadn't said out loud in months. Dr. Lucia Rivera, her former mentor at the Summer Innovation Program. It said, "I need help, I have an idea, and I'm not alone anymore." As she hit send, she felt a flutter in her belly, not just from the babies, but from the surge of hope she refused to kill. When she returned to her room, she found her dorm keycard disabled. Her things were outside in boxes. A note from housing read, "Immediate suspension, policy violation." No signature, no appeal, just exile. The Whitmores had moved fast. Power like theirs didn't waste time. Maya stood outside in the snow, watching students walk by pretending not to see her, her belly hidden beneath layers of wool, but her shame completely exposed. Yet she didn't flinch. She dragged her boxes into a cab, checked into a dingy motel near the bus station, and sat on the edge of the stained mattress with a notepad on her lap. She started to sketch. Ideas, a new app, a resource, a life raft for women like her. Women who were left, betrayed, written off. She titled it Nest, and below that she wrote 3 names she hadn't yet chosen, for the children whose futures would never be determined by rejection. They would not grow up knowing their mother had been discarded. They would know her as a builder, a fighter, a creator of solutions. She didn't fall asleep that night. She stayed up writing a scene, owed on a borrowed laptop, fueled by vending machine snacks and the rage of erasure. The check lay on the desk beside her, not as guilt, but as kindling. She hadn't disappeared. She was building an empire, and he had just funded it. The motel walls were thin, the heater clanked like an old man coughing in the night, and the blinking neon from the gas station sign across the street painted the ceiling in restless red. But Maya didn't sleep. She coded. She wrote until her fingers cramped and her eyes blurred, until the sunrise peeked through faded curtains and reminded her she was still alive. Her phone buzzed with notifications, not messages of support or kindness, but emails that read like silent executions. First came the one from Harvard Financial Aid. "Upon administrative review, your scholarship has been rescinded effective immediately." No explanation, no hearing, no appeal. Just a line that erased 4 years of sacrifice. Then her internship emailed, apologizing for the inconvenience but citing unforeseen reputational risk. Another door slammed. And then her phone pinged again, an automated text from campus housing. "Keycard deactivated, belongings moved, pick up by 5 p.m. They erased her existence with 3 coordinated actions, no doubt orchestrated by Margaret Whitmore's velvet-gloved ruthlessness. Maya knew what this was. Not bad luck, not misfortune. A purge. She was being erased, not for what she'd done, but for who she dared to be. A black girl from Roxbury who thought she could walk among Boston's elite and keep her head held high. She sat motionless on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the final email. A tuition bill she now had no way of paying. The total blinked at her like a threat. Her stomach churned, not from pregnancy, but from betrayal. Maya pressed her palm to her belly and whispered, "They want me gone, but we're still here." That afternoon, she caught a bus toward the city outskirts, suitcase in one hand, code-stained laptop in the other. Her phone was nearly dead, her body aching from stress and exhaustion, but she kept walking until she reached a red brick building with peeling white letters that read, Women's Refuge Center. Inside, the air was thick with survival. Mothers rocking babies, teens staring blankly at walls, women who had stories they no longer had the strength to tell. A volunteer handed Maya a form and a cot. The sheets smelled like bleach and regret, but she laid down, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching the ultrasound print now creased and soft from handling. That night, she couldn't stop shaking. It wasn't the cold, it was the fear, the kind that hums beneath your skin when you know you've been marked. At sunrise, she dressed in layers, wrapped her hoodie tightly around her growing stomach, and headed toward a pawn shop she'd passed on the bus ride. The door jingled when she entered, the air stale with metal and memory. Behind the counter stood a man with thick glasses and yellowed teeth. Maya pulled out a small velvet pouch and gently placed her grandfather's watch on the glass. It had been his prized possession, gifted after 40 years of working on Boston's subway rails. He used to wind it every Sunday while humming gospel songs. The clerk squinted, then said flatly, 200. Maya stared at him, rage boiling beneath her ribs. She knew it was worth more, but this wasn't a negotiation. It was surrender. She nodded, voice caught in her throat, and slid the watch across the counter with hands that didn't feel like hers. The man handed her the bills without ceremony. As she stepped outside, the wind felt crueler. She had traded a piece of her past to survive her present. Walking back, she passed a billboard promoting Whitmore Pharmaceuticals' latest donation campaign. Jonathan's family plastered in smiling portraits, posing as Boston's saviors, while behind the scenes they snuffed out lives like hers without remorse. She kept walking. She had no choice. Every rejectise one had become a stone in her pocket, but she was learning how to swim with weight. At the shelter, she tucked the money under her mattress, then opened her laptop again. Her app, Nest, was more than lines of code now. It was becoming a heartbeat, a cause, a rebellion stitched in digital defiance. She adjusted the prototype to include a secure community forum, access to nearby clinics, and a resource hub for women facing unplanned pregnancies with nowhere to go. As she worked, the woman on the next cot leaned over and whispered, "Are you building something?" Maya nodded. "Something I wish I had 6 months ago." Days passed like whispers. She took meals in silence, attended free classes offered by shelter volunteers, and kept refining her idea, scribbling diagrams in the margins of old newspapers. One day, while collecting donated clothes, she found a faded Harvard sweatshirt and couldn't decide whether to burn it or wear it like a scar. She chose to keep it, not out of pride, but out of rebellion. The news around town buzzed with stories of philanthropy and winter galas hosted by the Whitmores, but Maya ignored it all. She stopped checking Jonathan's social media. She no longer needed to see the face of the man who'd tried to erase her. He had become irrelevant. Her war wasn't against him anymore. It was against a system that thought people like her were disposable. One afternoon, the shelter director pulled her aside and said, "You have fire in your eyes. I don't know what you're building, but don't stop." Maya thanked her and returned to her cot, sitting cross-legged with a new purpose humming through her fingertips. Every late night at the shelter, every whispered prayer in the shower stall, every time she pressed her belly and felt a faint flutter, it all reminded her she wasn't alone. She was no longer the girl Jonathan discarded. She was someone new, someone forged in the aftermath, and the system that tried to bury her, it had underestimated the wrong woman she saw. stepped out of the pawn shop, gripping the two crumpled bills like they were sacred parchment, her heart pounding with equal parts shame and resolve. The cold wind bit at her cheeks, but she kept walking, eyes locked ahead, not behind. Maya didn't cry anymore. She calculated. That night, she found an old phone in a donation bin, charged it at a library, and reached out to the one person who had ever believed in her mind, not her background. Dr. Celia Rivera, the aging professor who once called Maya a revolution in a hoodie. Without hesitation, Dr. Rivera sent her a one-way bus ticket to California, no questions asked. Maya clutched her belly through the long, rattling journey west, cramping and nauseated, but refusing to bend. At a Greyhound terminal in San Jose, she arrived with nothing but a small duffel bag, swollen ankles, and the fire of 1,000 betrayals burning inside her. Dr. Rivera picked her up in an old Prius, hugged her tight and said, "No pity here, only blueprints." They moved her into a shared studio apartment above a noisy laundromat, where the ceiling leaked when it rained, and mice held their own conferences in the walls. But Maya didn't flinch. She split her time between coding tutorials and prenatal vitamins, eating ramen while reading business blogs, sleeping on a yoga mat beside a pile of thrifted baby books, her dreams woven between contractions. She used Jonathan's check, not to vanish, but to register a domain, buy a second-hand laptop, and enroll in Stanford's extension program with every dime left. Every time her fingers trembled over the keyboard, she whispered, "This is for them." Her nights were consumed by JavaScript pitch decks and whispered lullabies to the lives growing inside her. She started building an app for women, real women, who didn't have silver spoons, only steel spines. The prototype was buggy, the reviews brutal, but she kept tweaking, testing, and fixing between doctor visits and Braxton Hicks. Sometimes her hands swelled so badly, she coded with a spoon taped to her wrist. She emailed investors at dawn, hustled, networks in borrowed clothes, and made connections through Dr. Rivera's former students who at first pitied her until they saw her pitch. One night, a former tech executive named Layla sat on a milk crate across from her and said, "You don't need luck, Maya. You are the storm." That line became the app's first tagline. Her reputation grew slowly in coffee shops, whispered in meetups, floated through startup forums. Still, she kept her pregnancy hidden under oversized hoodies until the night before her Stanford midterm, when her water broke, right there in the exam hall. The room froze, gasps rising like waves, but Maya held up one hand, steady and calm, looked the professor dead in the eye and said, "I need 5 more minutes. I know this algorithm." The professor, stunned but silent, nodded. Maya finished her code, hit submit, then calmly collapsed in a puddle of amniotic fluid as chaos exploded around her. She was rushed to the hospital with her laptop still open beside her, half her code highlighted in green, her contractions now full-blown and relentless. Hours later, drenched in sweat and determination, Maya gave birth to 3 crying miracles, her voice hoarse but firm as she named each one like she was branding her legacy into the universe: Zion, Naya, and Truth. The nurses wept. The doctor called it insane. But Maya simply kissed each tiny forehead and said, "Welcome to war. Mummy's building us a world." The exam room blurred around her as Maya's water soaked the Stanford carpet, but she refused to move until her last answer was typed and submitted. A quiet declaration of war against the universe that tried to break her. Hours later, under the flickering fluorescent lights of a crowded public hospital, she lay on a creaking bed with no family beside her, no hand to squeeze, no soft voice to encourage her through the pain. Just a nurse who looked too tired to care, and a clock that refused to move faster. Sweat poured down her face, tears streaming silently as she screamed through the contractions, clutching the edges of the bed like they could anchor her to life. And then, after what felt like the longest night of her existence, a piercing cry cut through the noise. Her body trembled as they laid the baby on her chest, and the moment she looked into his eyes, wide, fierce, and full of fire, she whispered, "Nathan, that's your name. You're the reason I didn't quit." She wept into his forehead, unable to believe that something so perfect came from so much pain. There were no flowers, no balloons, no family gathering in celebration, just silence and the smell of antiseptic. But in that silence, Maya found her beginning, Discharged within 2 days, she cradled Nathan in one arm while pushing a second-hand stroller she found for $10 on Craigslist. Her life became a whirlwind of diaper changes, sleepless nights, and investor rejections. But in every no, she heard a maybe. And in every maybe, she carved a yes. Sitting in a tiny co-working space surrounded by 20-somethings with wealthy parents and seed funds, Maya nursed Nathan with one hand while pitching with the other. Her startup, a mobile app connecting low-income mothers with real-time medical help and emergency alerts, was born out of her own desperation, her own near-death experience giving birth without adequate care. But investors didn't see that. They saw a young black woman with a baby and assumed it was a charity pitch. "Why should we invest in you?" one man in a navy blazer scoffed, swirling his coffee like her future was in its foam. Maya didn't blink. "Because I have 3 mouths to feed. And I don't fail," she said, voice steady, fire blazing behind tired eyes. The room stilled. One woman, seated quietly at the end of the table, tapped her pen and leaned forward. "Telma, Imor." That was all Maya needed. A crack in the door. She told her story not with pity but with power. She described the night she coded until dawn with Nathan asleep beside her, the statistics that proved black maternal death rates were soaring, and how her app could change that. She didn't just present a company, she presented a movement. One sleepless night later, her email pinged. $20,000 in seed funding approved. She gasped, clutching Nathan to her chest, whispering, "We did it, baby." She didn't buy champagne, she bought diapers, domain hosting, and a second-hand desk. Every penny was reinvested. Her team began with 2 other single moms she met at the shelter, both brilliant and overlooked. They worked in shifts, passing babies between lines of code. They built not just an app, but a sisterhood, a revolution born in poverty and raised on purpose. Maya printed out her first pitch deck and taped it above the crib as motivation. When Nathan cried, she fed him with one hand and emailed developers with the other. When bills piled up, she reminded herself this was temporary. Her life had changed, but her hunger had only sharpened. The app launched in beta within 6 months, gaining traction in local hospitals and women's shelters. Maya was featured in a minor tech blog, then another. Soon her inbox was filled with messages from mothers who finally felt seen. Her story became their mirror. At night, Maya would lie beside Nathan and whisper, "You're going to have everything they tried to take from us." She kissed his forehead and returned to work, eyes burning, heart unstoppable. The pain of rejection, betrayal, and abandonment didn't disappear, but it became her engine. Her app was now being tested in 5 cities, and her team had doubled. Maya began booking speaking gigs, showing up in the same rooms that once denied her. She still remembered the humiliation of being escorted out of Jonathan's life like trash. But she also remembered the look in Nathan's eyes, the fierce cry he let out the day he was born, and the sound of her own voice saying, "I won't fail." That echo lived inside her. It was the rhythm to her every step. It was the anthem she hummed while warming bottles and balancing spreadsheets. One day she looked up from her laptop to find Nathan standing, his first wobbly attempt at independence. She clapped, tears brimming, not just for his tiny step, but for the mountain she was climbing beside him. And though she hadn't yet met the world's validation, she had found something even more priceless: purpose. She wasn't just building a company, she was building a legacy. One investor doubted her, one man left her, one system tried to erase her. But Nathan? Nathan gave her a name stronger than anything they could take away: Mama. Maya stared at the email for minutes that felt like hours, her fingers trembling slightly above the keyboard as the past she fought to escape now invited her back with open arms. But she knew better than to mistake formality for forgiveness. The words Boston Healthcare Summit glared at her from the screen like a test, not a triumph. For years she had rewritten her story with nothing but grit, sleepless nights, and the determined cry of a child who never asked to be born into betrayal. Johnson Health Technologies had grown from a desperate idea scribbled on a napkin into a nationwide powerhouse, empowering single mothers, connecting rural clinics to vital resources, digitizing patient histories for the forgotten and voiceless. She'd made her first million not by pleasing the powerful, but by serving the overlooked. Investors, once skeptical, now scrambled to get a seat at her table. Tech blogs called her the Maverick Mother. Business magazines splashed her face across glossy covers, often beside the words disruption, resilience, and legacy. But at home she was just Mama Maya, braiding hair before morning meetings, packing school lunches while checking analytics, reading bedtime stories with Ons, a hand and fine-tuning code with the other. Nathan, bold and intuitive, Nina, her artistic soul, and Noah, the quiet thinker, all of them reflections of different pieces of her heart. She taught them about kindness, strength, and the danger of silence. Yet despite her success, Boston clung to her like a shadow with a name: Jonathan. She hadn't spoken his name aloud in years, but the city whispered it through alleyways, headlines, and sometimes Nathan's blue-flecked eyes. Accepting the keynote meant facing ghosts, not just his, but her own. She booked the flight with steady fingers, determined to walk into the lion's den, not as prey, but as the storm. The summit venue, glass-walled and gleaming, sat just blocks from the Whitmore Foundation. Her heels echoed on marble as whispers swirled. That's her. The girl who didn't disappear. A woman in a red power suit stood taller than shame. The same girl they cast out, now their guest of honor. On stage, lights blazing, Maya spoke, not just about tech, but about truth. No woman should have to choose between dignity and survival, she declared, her voice steady as thunder. Applause erupted, but behind it she sensed him. Jonathan, watching, maybe regretting, maybe resenting. She didn't flinch. She exited the stage and walked down the corridor with purpose. Cameras followed, reporters begged for interviews, but she had a promise to keep, to herself. She would leave that city stronger than she entered it. That night, at a private rooftop dinner hosted by sponsors, Maya stood beneath the stars with her head high as the skyline glittered like a field of dreams reclaimed. Champagne clinked in crystal flutes, and she toasted to every no that became a yes, every door slammed that taught her how to build her own. A younger female founder approached, tears in her eyes, saying, "You made me believe I could." That was the real million. Impact. Not currency, but change. As she rode back to her hotel, Maya looked out at the Charles River, reflecting the lights of a city that once broke her. Now it mirrored her strength. Her children waited, back home with stories of recess and science projects, and she couldn't wait to hear every word. She typed a quick message. "Mom crushed it. I love you 3 more than the stars." As she hit send, she felt a peace settle over her chest, not because Boston welcomed her, but because she no longer needed its approval. Power wasn't in revenge, it was in rebuilding. And Maya, she was just getting started. The invitation had been formal, sterile even. Keynote speaker Maya Johnson, founder CEO of Johnson Health Technologies. But the moment Maya stepped onto the stage, applause turned into stunned murmurs as the camera zoomed in on her braided hair, confident eyes, and the teenage boy beside her wearing a sleek navy suit and a subtle smile that mirrored another man's. Maya's voice echoed across the auditorium as she shared her journey, not of algorithms and investments, but of resilience, betrayal, and single motherhood, her hand resting briefly on Nathan's shoulder as she said, "Behind every innovation is a reason to fight when the world writes you off." In the back row, cloaked in a tailored suit that no longer masked the rot inside, Jonathan Whitmore gripped a whiskey glass, his eyes flicking dismissively to the woman he once dismissed, until Nathan's face turned toward the camera, and those piercing, unmistakable blue eyes met his. Time fractured. The glass slipped from Jonathan's hand and shattered against the marble floor, like the illusion of control he'd spent years maintaining. Silence swallowed the room. "My God, that's my son," he whispered. But it was too late for quiet epiphanies. The media caught it, the world saw it, and so did his fiancée, who blinked in horror, her lips trembling as she watched the boy's face and realized the timeline of Jonathan's lies. She stood slowly, her diamond ring catching the spotlight, and with one controlled breath slid it off her finger. Inga placed it on the table and walked out, heels clicking like a gavel striking down judgment. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled as if truth had finally been spoken into its bones. Maya didn't flinch. Didn't. She kept speaking as if nothing had happened, as if the destruction of a man who once destroyed her was simply a ripple in a much larger wave. Afterward, as reporters swarmed, Nathan approached Jonathan in the lobby, his stride calm but deliberate, and said, "You looked at my mother and saw nothing. You chose fear over love. I was the consequence, and the gift." Jonathan reached out with trembling fingers, but Nathan stepped back, emotions swirling in his eyes yet held in check. "You left us in the dirt and thought we'd die there." But she planted something instead. Maya joined her son, her posture regal, her success undeniable. Cameras flashed. "I don't hate you," she said softly, her voice almost a balm. "But I don't owe you closure either." Jonathan sank into the leather couch behind him, surrounded by the remnants of power, but no one left to wield it for. Every executive who once clapped at his boardroom threats now clutched Maya's business card instead. Every former ally now looked at Nathan with curiosity, as if realizing a new legacy had quietly taken root. Maya walked past him without another glance, and outside, the press parted as she and Nathan stepped into a black SUV waiting for them. The car pulled off while Jonathan remained behind, a ghost in a glass tower that was no longer his. That night, every major outlet ran with the headline, "CEO's Forgotten Son Stuns Healthcare Summit. Maya Johnson's revenge is not just emotional, it's economic." Meanwhile, Maya tucked Nathan in at their hotel suite, brushing a hand across his curls and whispering, "You were never a mistake. You were the mission." As Nathan slept, she stared out the window, watching Boston's skyline blink against the dark, no longer a city of shame, but a city she had reclaimed. In his penthouse, Jonathan sat alone, the ringless finger still burning, and in that cavern of regret, he replayed ever-peers, a word he had thrown like knives, now realizing they had built the armor she wore today. His assistant sent a message. "Board is requesting your resignation." He didn't respond. His empire, like his family, was gone. Maya, meanwhile, received a call from a global venture firm. They wanted to fund her next venture. She smiled, knowing this wasn't just her story anymore. It was Nathan's, and every woman who had ever been told she couldn't rise. As the summit footage continued to go viral, a young girl in the Bronx watched it on her cracked phone screen and whispered, "One day, that'll be me." And somewhere deep inside her soul, a seed was planted. "You have my eyes," Jonathan stammered, the weight of recognition flattening his voice to a breathless hush. And in that moment, the glittering chandelier above the gala seemed to dim. The clinking glasses froze mid-air, and the heartbeat of the entire ballroom skipped. Every elite guest, politicians, venture capitalists, and tech giants, turned toward the stage with wide eyes and held breath, their designer suits and gowns unable to shield them from the raw storm unfolding. Maya stood in front of them, regal in a deep emerald gown that shimmered like her resilience, her curls swept to the side, her eyes burning with a clarity forged from years of fire and betrayal. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't soften. She took the mic with steady hands, her son standing tall beside her, and when she opened her mouth, truth poured like a river that refused to be dammed any longer. "For years your systems tried to erase me," she began, her voice echoing across marble and chandeliers, slicing through the suffocating hush. "You erased my scholarships, my housing, my dignity. You tried to erase my existence." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This was no ordinary keynote. "And yet," she continued, gesturing toward Nathan, "your blood were, elks beside me." Gasps rippled. Cameras from the press flickered like lightning storms. "You built a legacy on the backs of people like me, then discarded us when we stopped being convenient. You called my child a mistake. You called me a stain. But tonight," she lifted her chin, her voice steady like a mountain, "we write a new legacy." She looked directly at Jonathan, whose face had lost all color, his hands trembling at his sides. "This city was built by women like me. Women who worked while pregnant, who coded while their babies cried in the next room, who sold their heirlooms to buy diapers and server space. You see failure, I see fuel." The silence deepened, and then Nathan stepped forward. "You had your chance," he said, voice clear and fierce, those piercing blue eyes. Jonathan's eyes locked with the man who abandoned him. You chose fear, you chose power, you chose to leave her in the cold, and now you've lost all of it. The sound of a chair scraping echoed like a cannon as Jonathan's fiancée, her lips parted in disbelief, took off her diamond ring and placed it gently on the table before walking out. Past reporters, past cameras, past shame. Live on every major network. Maya didn't flinch. She turned back to the audience, a sea of wealth and legacy, and lifted the mic one final time. We rise not because you give us permission, but because we were born to. The room erupted, not with applause at first, but with shock. And then a slow, deliberate standing ovation began. First from a black female founder in the back row, then a Latinx doctor near the front, then the CEO of a women-led venture firm, until the entire room was on their feet, clapping not for pedigree but for power. That night, as the chandeliers flickered and champagne sat untouched, the Whitmore board convened in a side chamber thick with tension. The silence was brutal, the vote swift. For the first time in 50 years, a Whitmore was voted out of his own empire. Jonathan sat alone in the aftermath, surrounded by echoes, everything he'd built slipping through fingers that once signed bills, high on dollar checks. Meanwhile, Maya, flanked by her children, walked down the gala stairs into the waiting black SUV, not as a guest, not as a victim, but as the storm that had come full circle. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Boston finally knew her name, not whispered in gossip, but shouted in headlines. Maya Johnson, the girl they tried to erase, the mother they shamed, the CEO they underestimated. And as the city buzzed with her truth, the foundation beneath the old guard trembled because they all realized Maya hadn't just survived, she had rewritten the rules. Maya's heels echoed sharply against the marble floor as the elevator doors closed between her and the man who once wrote her off like a bad investment. The silence inside the lift was heavier than steel, yet her soul, finally, felt weightless. Jonathan stood frozen outside, surrounded by board members who once bowed to his power, now watching him with thinly veiled disdain. He had built skyscrapers and shattered competition, but he couldn't rebuild trust with the son whose eyes mirrored his own. "Nathan," Jonathan called out, voice cracking, "I missed everything, but I swear I'll never miss another moment if you'll just let me in." Nathan's jaw clenched. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, in dreams, in nightmares, in empty father-son school events where he pretended not to care. "I used to stare at the door, waiting for you," he said flatly. "Every birthday, every hospital visit, every spelling bee. But you never came." Jonathan's eyes welled up. "I was a coward. I thought I was protecting you both from my world. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from shame." Maya's voice returned, steady as stone, through the speakerphone she had left connected in Nathan's hand. "No, Jonathan, you weren't ashamed, you were selfish, and now you're sorry because the world finally saw what I lived through." In silence, Jonathan stepped forward. "Maya, I was wrong. I was blind. You didn't deserve what I did to you, what I didn't do for him." Nathan glanced down at the phone, then back at the man whose suit was tailored, but whose life was unraveling at the seams. "You're not the man who raised me. My mom coded through labor pains to feed me. She missed sleep, not milestones. She taught me to walk, not run from responsibility." Jonathan's voice dropped to a whisper, like a dying flame. "What can I do to prove I mean it this time?" Maya's voice remained calm. "You had years to prove that. This isn't a script you can rewrite, Jonathan. We've already closed the book." The elevator dinged at the lobby, and Maya stepped out into flashes of paparazzi bulbs, none of which made her flinch. She raised her chin and moved with the quiet dignity of a woman who bled in silence and rose in storms. Behind her, Nathan stayed still. "Do you think he'll ever really change?" he asked aloud. Maya looked back one last time. Change comes with sacrifice. But regret? Regret only visits when you've lost everything worth keeping. Upstairs, Jonathan stood before the boardroom table that no longer belonged to him. He sank into a chair, staring at a screen showing the news. Whitmore legacy ends. Woman he rejected now runs healthcare empire. His hand shook as he turned off the TV. Nathan followed Maya into the limo, silence stretching between them like threads spun with memory and ache. Finally he whispered, "I don't want to hate him, but I don't know how to love him either." Maya reached over, clasping her son's hand. "Then start with truth. Not trust, not love, just truth. And the rest will follow. Or it won't. But you'll know you gave it clarity." As the limo pulled away from the gala, Boston's skyline behind them, the bitter cold couldn't touch the warmth of their bond. And far above, the tower that once bore Jonathan's name flickered under new management, the lights dimming like the end of an era. In his corner office, Jonathan finally wept, not because he lost a company, but because he realized too late that his greatest dividend had been waiting for him to show up. And he never did. He said, "I'd never make it. Now my name is on a building across from Harvard's. His empire? Dust." The echoes of Maya's final speech at the summit still hummed through every corner of the city when the morning sun crowned the skyline, bathing the newly christened Johnson Center for Innovation and Motherhood in golden light. The woman who once gave birth in a public hospital now stood immortalized in steel and glass across from Harvard itself, a living contradiction to every doubt, every insult, every door that had ever slammed in her face. Crowds poured into the plaza, not to honor Jonathan Whitmore, the man who once held Boston's power in his clenched fists, but to witness a moment of poetic justice, one written not with anger but with relentless work, bold vision, and a heart that refused to surrender. Maya adjusted the microphone. Her eyes scanned the audience. Students, single mothers, healthcare professionals, CEOs, and a few faces who once mocked her, now quiet in awe. Her voice was steady but rich with the gravity of a life lived in resistance. "They said I was nothing. A maid, a mistake, a burden. They said no one would remember my name. But here it is, etched in granite, lit by ambition, and carried on by every woman who dared to dream while the world told her to settle." Flashbacks flickered through her mind as she spoke, the sterile sting of hospital lights the night Nathan was born, the rejection letters, the pitch meetings where her confidence shook but never broke, the taste of ramen noodles as she coded through midnight with babies crying in the background. And Jonathan, the man who once kissed her and later crushed her, now sat in obscurity, his company dissolved, his name fading from every marquee, boardroom, and Forbes list. Maya had not just moved on, she had ascended. Meanwhile, Nathan, now tall and composed, walked across the MIT campus with a quiet kind of confidence. He wasn't interested in headlines or revenge. He wanted discovery, innovation, peace. And in the soft space between his mother's triumph and his father's downfall, he found something rare: clarity. He no longer needed Jonathan's approval. The boy with blue eyes was now a man forging a legacy of his own. Professors praised his ideas. Tech firms offered internships. But Nathan chose to stay rooted, building a solar-powered medical device for low-income neighborhoods, inspired by the woman who raised him with both grit and grace. Jonathan, reduced to a man haunted by echoes, tried to reach out. Letters, emails, a voicemail where he choked back tears. But Maya never responded, not out of cruelty, but because she had nothing left to say. She had spoken her truth, the world had listened, and Nathan had made his choice. The legacy was now in motion, and there was no room left for the ghosts of what could have been. At the dedication ceremony, Maya introduced the Johnson Foundation's new scholarship fund. For every mother who stayed up all night not to dream but to survive. For every woman told she was too much or not enough. This is for you. Build anyway. Create anyway. Rise anyway. Media outlets crowned her America's resilience icon. Bookstores couldn't keep copies of her memoir more than enough on the shelves. The story of a black woman abandoned, mocked, rejected, only to outgrow and outshine the very institutions that tried to erase her, became the anthem of a generation. Oprah called. Michelle Obama wrote the foreword to her second book. Netflix bought the rights. Still, Maya stayed grounded. Every Sunday she cooked with her children. No assistants, no drivers. Just joy, spice and laughter in a kitchen that smelled like love and survival. One afternoon, Maya returned to the quiet bench outside the Boston hospital where it all began. She sat with a cup of coffee, watching a young woman with tired eyes rock her newborn. Maya smiled, walked it over, and slipped an envelope into her diaper bag. Inside was a note. For your dream, don't give up. MJ. Because that was the real legacy. Not the buildings, not the billions, not even the best-selling books. It was in every woman who felt seen because Maya dared to be visible. In every child who believed in miracles because Nathan walked with truth. In every boardroom that now had a seat for a black woman who didn't change her voice, her hair, or her story to belong. As the years passed, Maya continued to evolve. She mentored, she invested, she gave speeches in rooms she once cleaned, but she never forgot. Not the tears, not the loneliness, not the way Jonathan looked away when she needed him most. And yet, she didn't hold it. She released it. Because forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for her own peace. She had too much light ahead to drag old shadows. On her 60th birthday, Nathan surprised her with a holographic video of testimonies from the women she'd helped. One whispered, "You saved me." Another wept, "Because of you, my daughter is in college." Maya cried that night, not out of sorrow but gratitude, for every no that led to a better yes, for every heartbreak that seeded a revolution. In her final address before retirement, Maya ended with the same fire that once pushed her through storm after storm. The best revenge isn't anger, it's success, it's legacy, it's outliving every lie they told you, and then turning around to make sure the next woman doesn't have to fight as hard. That's power, that's purpose, that's how we rise. And rise she did. From a hospital cot to history books. From abandoned to admired. From overlooked to unforgettable. Maya Johnson didn't just survive. She sculpted a world where women like her could thrive. And long after the applause faded, her name remained, on buildings, on hearts, and in every echo that whispered, "She mad it."